Good evening, and welcome to the Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. I'm delighted, as always, to see everyone here in person tonight, and also welcome everyone who's joining us during the live stream for our fourth session of reflections on Lent and the events of Easter through art. Tonight, we are following Christ's Passion through the reading from the Gospel of St. John, which lead us from Christ's trial before Pilate to his entombment after his death on the cross. These readings are beautifully depicted in our three works of art of this evening. Our first work of art, What is Truth? Christ Before Pilate, by the realist painter Nicola G. from 1890, challenges us to contemplate this most fundamental question: what is truth? Exposes us to an extraordinary representation of Christ's crucifixion. Our third and last work of the evening, The Entombment, or Christ being carried to his tomb, attributed to Michelangelo, was initiated in 1500-1501 during the era of the High Renaissance. So we have quite a wide spread of works of art tonight. This painting is of particular interest since it was never finished. Unfinished pieces allow us to learn about the artist's third picture of this evening, Michelangelo's incomplete work, to talk about the mystery and stories surrounding us over centuries. Artists from all eras, from the antiquity, sometimes abandoned them for a variety of reasons. It was either for historical circumstances, the artist's or subject's sudden death, the shortage of funding, or simply the lack of inspiration or interest in the project. Regardless, unfinished artworks are riveting and intriguing, rather by the reason of the incompleteness than in spite of it. They tell the creative process that was not supposed to be revealed. Suspended in a state of coming into being, they present new perspectives on artistic techniques, as well as on artwork's historic context. Even in some cases making unfinishedness a deliberate, staged an exhibition called Unfinished: Thoughts Left Visible in 2016. The exhibition curator Kelly Baum stated, and I quote, "An unfinished picture is almost like an X-ray, which allows you to see beyond the surface of the painting to what lies behind. Earlier versions, preparatory sketches, all of the underlying architecture, which is normally disguised and suppressed. And this gives profound insight into the creative process." End of quote. From an abundance of examples of unfinished pieces, I have chosen three, exploring the different reasons why they were left unfinished. The incomplete state of artwork, the so-called in Italian non finito, has the great ability to cause the observers to wonder why. Whether abandoned, interrupted, or deliberately left in this state, unfinished art always holds an element of fascination. We are also left with the question whether an unfinished work of art can have the artistic merit of a perceived complete work. These examples beg the question, what is finished? Does an artwork need to be worked to perfection to reveal its full meaning? Our first example are these four statues of Michelangelo, named by the scholars as the awakening slave, the young slave, the bearded slave, and the Atlas, which claim great fame due above all to the unfinished state. They are some of the finest examples of Michelangelo's non finito works. These marble statues are magnificent illustrations of the difficulty of the artist in carving out the figures from the bonds and physical weight of the marble, and emblematic of the artist's struggle of man to free the spirit of matter. It is claimed that Michelangelo intentionally left them incomplete to represent the eternal struggle of human beings to free themselves from the physical world. Our second example, the Holy Family with St. John the Baptist, painted in 1528 to 37 by Pierino del Vaga, demonstrates a great contrast between the areas that were only drawing and the areas where paint was already applied. There's a tendency to assume everything in the painting is built up at the same level at the same time. But artists sometimes keep one figure completely blank while finishing another, leaving a fascinatingly ghostly presence in their work. It is not known why Del Vaga abandoned this painting. Del Vaga's work was considered the perfect teaching tool for Renaissance painting. When you look closely, it has all the different stages of paintings as it has been developed. For example, Christ and John the Baptist are fully finished. There's multiple layers of glaze, there's even some highlights, so they're completely finished. And also the hands of the Virgin and one hand of St. Joseph. However, other areas, for example, he just probably started putting some glaze down here, but the other areas, we can see the pen and ink drawing. The clothes of the Virgin Mary and also Joseph are just drawn in by hand with quick strokes. Mary's face probably has been transferred with a preparatory drawing using a cartoon, which we had mentioned before. And there's a link on the handout at the very bottom, which shows a little YouTube video, and it's called the pouncing method, how in the antiquity and in the Renaissance, artists used to transfer drawings onto a canvas. And since this is so well developed, I assume they used this transfer method. It is fascinating to see how the artist is working out the composition directly on the canvas and how he's working with the different components. Although the portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt, painted by Elizabeth Chamatoff in 1945, is unfinished, it undoubtedly flatters the president, as he is known to have been dying of heart failure for some years. This was borne out, unfortunately. While Chamatoff was painting, Roosevelt complained of a headache and then slumped forward, unconscious. He had suffered a stroke and died later that day. Hence, the painting is unfinished. However, she decided that it was such a significant work of art to keep it. And I'm interested in your thoughts about unfinished works of art, and we will have an opportunity to explore this topic later in our third work of art of this evening. And with this brief introductory comments, I now would like to turn over to our first work of art of this evening. What is Truth? Christ before Pilate, painted by Nikolai G. in 1890. G was born in 1831 into a Ukrainian noble family of French origin and died in 1894. He was a Ukrainian painter during the Realist and early Symbolism movements. G's works were famous for their historical and religious motifs. In 1840, G was taken to Kiev and graduated from the first Kiev gymnasium. He went on to study physics and mathematics at Kiev University and St. Petersburg University. In 1850, G gave up his career in science and enrolled in the Imperial Academy of Art in St. Petersburg. He studied under the guidance of master painter Peter Bessin. In 1857, he graduated from the academy, where he received a gold medal for his works. The gold medal secured him a scholarship for G to study abroad. He visited Germany, Switzerland, and France. In 1860, he settled in Italy. His works made a strong impression when exhibited in St. Petersburg, and G was made a professor there at the Imperial Academy of Arts. Finally, in 1870, G returned to St. Petersburg, where he turned to Russian history for its subject matter. Some of his works were great successes, but other historical paintings were met with little interest. G took this cold response to his work very hard. He wrote that a man should live by doing agricultural work and that art should not be for sale. However, he continued to produce artwork. He bought a small farm in the countryside in Ukraine and moved there. He became acquainted with Leo Tolstoy and was an enthusiastic follower of Tolstoy's philosophy. As you consider tonight's first painting, I would like to quote from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 18, verses 37 and 38. I quote, "Pilate asked him, 'So you are a king?' Jesus answered, 'You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. For everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice.' Pilate asked him, 'What is truth?'" And with this, I would like to invite your comments and what you see in the painting, how it's maybe, how the composition is organized, which colors, who is in the painting. Yeah?
The thing that seems to be tricky to me when I look at this solar, the light's coming in and it's super bright. And I'm looking at the tile on the floor, and just where the light is hitting the tile, it's just totally bleached out the color. And then there's tile that you can see that's blue and green is red in color. And it's kind of the same thing with on the walls, blue and then it's red. I'm just struck by that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's some meaning with that, but I'm just struck by how it changes.
Yeah, and I blew this up actually, and I spent a lot of time looking at the tile, because I agree the artist must have spent a lot of time working out the exact details of the tile flooring. And here he added a lot of color to it. Is that what you were pointing out?
Yeah, that are cool colors,
mm-hmm.
And then they're warmer colors.
Yeah, and I think he definitely wanted to work with the sunlight and the shade to really make sure that he presented the shadow of Pilate. But I couldn't see a real pattern in there, or I couldn't read anything in it. But if someone wants to jump in on this?
You notice you don't see, the painter didn't show Christ's arms or hands, because I think because Christ is not there to fight or fight back or resist or defend himself. He's just there for all of this passion to play out. Yeah. You don't see his arms.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, he has his arms behind his body, and he's not defensive in any way of exactly. He kind of lets everything wash over him. He accepts it because he has accepted the path already while he was in the garden of Gethsemane. Yeah.
I just find it intriguing that Christ is kind of the dark background area. It's almost as if, for me, when you're looking at what is truthful for Pilate, truth is somewhat hidden, somewhat dark there, because Christ is in the background, not all in the light.
You were talking about the light, how it's going from left to right mostly. But yet there's a shadow directly across from Pilate on the wall. Third person?
Right. So there is quite a bit of speculation about that particular area. And one explanation was, as we have seen, that artists change their mind as they're going through the process of producing a work of art. It is speculated that he might have painted Pilate a little bit closer, so he had pushed him further into the painting, and that might have been his head there. But then he changed his mind, and he didn't probably want to depict them so close together, just giving both of them room. Certainly giving Christ space for himself, but also Pilate. There's surely different opinions about Pilate and Pilate's role in the Passion. I don't think he was necessarily the bad guy. He had the opportunity to set Jesus free, and he was certainly, I think, contemplating about it. And he didn't wish Christ to die. I think that he made that clear with washing his hands. But then also, I think, as everyone of us, he felt under pressure through the crowd calling out. And then probably also he might have not wanted to be seen necessarily, to be associated with Christ in terms of Caesar, because in the crowd they say, oh, Caesar's is the emperor. So I think he was also in a very humanly delicate position to make the decisions he was making. I love the, as everyone, many have pointed out, the play on the shadow and the bright light, and is always just if we are standing in the light, does that make us right? Is that the one who says the truth? So I think that was a bit of play. And what I thought of was, when we sometimes think of other paintings, we had looked at a painting last year as well, it's usually Christ who is the bright light, or who is in the light. And here it very much seems flipped. Also, if we think of the clothing, usually in that stage of the Passion, when it's being depicted, Christ wears a white tunic for the symbol of righteousness. But here it's almost kind of flipped. And I felt a little, maybe G wanted to say, maybe in this case we don't need to see. Maybe we need to listen. Jesus doesn't need to be the light. He doesn't need to step out. And as you maybe said, he doesn't need to be defensive. we just maybe almost close our eyes and just listen to the word. So I thought that was quite interesting. Yes?
I think there's the shadow on Jesus from the perspective of Pilate is that there's a shadow over the question. He just really doesn't understand. Jesus is really a shadow of the knowledge that Pilate has that just isn't able to be revealed at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's beautiful.
Perhaps one of the reasons that Pilate is in the light is because this picture, in a way, is about Pilate's decision-making. Christ has already accepted his fate. And Pilate is a politician, and he's considering political expediency, his career, etc. And so it really is, in a way, a lot about Pilate, this particular picture, and how we need, teachers today, we need good politicians, we need people to stick to their beliefs in difficult times, even though they aren't popular. It's easy, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. And I think one comment that has been made quite often about Jesus is, and we will see a great contrast with this painting and then the second painting in particular. He's quite unkempt. It's very rare that Jesus is being depicted kind of disheveled, the hair really kind of wild, and I think that was a comment that would be often made about this particular painting. He didn't depict Jesus perfect or beautiful. So, yes. And I think in terms of kind of in the reading, it's we hear about the voice and the listening to the truth. I think it would be good to move on. And as we leave this painting, I would like to pose the question: am I listening to the truth of God's voice, or am I listening to the voice of God? That was a question I was contemplating about as I was working on this painting. I think it's now time to move on to our second painting of the evening. It's Christ of St. John of the Cross, painted in 1951 by the surrealist artist Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali, and I will not try to say his full Spanish name, was born in 1904 and died in 1989 in Figueres in Spain. Dali was a surrealist painter and printmaker, influential for his explorations of subconscious imagery. As an art student in Madrid and Barcelona, Dali assimilated a vast number of artistic styles and displayed unusual technical facility as a painter. It was not until the late 1920s, however, that two events brought about the development of his mature artistic style. One was his discovery of Sigmund Freud's writing on the erotic significance of subconscious imagery, and two, his affiliation with the Paris Surrealists. The Paris Surrealists were a group of artists and writers who thought to establish the greater reality of the human subconscious over reason. To bring up images from his subconscious mind, Dali began to introduce hallucinatory states in himself by a process he described as paranoid critical. And I will just mention, and I'm sure because everyone has that question in mind, did he use drugs to bring himself into this state? And I kind of looked it up, and famously he supposedly said once, "I don't do drugs, I am drug." And he always denied that he was taking drugs. He had another way to getting himself into this state. During 1929 to 1937, his painting style matured with extraordinary rapidity, and he produced the paintings which made him the world's best-known surrealist artist. He depicted a dream world in which commonplace objects were juxtaposed, deformed, or otherwise metamorphosed in a bizarre and irrational fashion. Dali portrayed these objects in meticulous realistic detail and usually placed them within bleak sunlit landscapes that were reminiscent of his Catalonian homeland. Perhaps the most famous of these enigmatic images is The Persistence of Memory from 1931, in which limp melting watches rest in an eerily calm landscape. However, in the 1930s, Dali switched to painting in a more academic style, influenced by the Renaissance painter Raphael. In the period from 1950 to 1970, Dali painted many works of religious themes. As we consider our second work of art of the evening, I will quote from the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 30. I quote, "When Jesus had taken the wine, he said, 'It is finished.' And bowing his head, he handed over the Spirit." End of quote. And yeah, this is our next painting, and I'm curious to hear what everyone has to say about this, or thinks about this, or how we kind of want to break it down. It is an amazing painting, that's for sure. However, it drew a lot of criticism at the beginning when it was shown for the first time. But now it's one of the most beloved paintings, and probably one of the highly regarded paintings of the 21st century. And I don't know, is anyone familiar? Has anyone seen this painting before, maybe? Oh, okay, that's good. Okay. I love it. Just jump in.
I'll just say some simple observations. I mean, below it almost looks like Lake Tigris. I mean, it looks like someone with a net in a boat. So that's what that means when they go down there.
Divide the picture into two again. So we have the upper half with the Christ crucified, and then down here kind of a landscape.
And I don't know if that's occurring, like, I don't know if that's like here he's thinking, wow, we thought he was the guy. You know, he's crucified.
This one?
Yeah. You know, that's what I'm wondering.
Oh,
If this is during the time where Christ was crucified, with their nets, wondering, what did we just live?
mm-hmm. So yeah, I think if we want to start with this, so okay. So Christ hovers in midair above, and then down below is more kind of a landscape, and we have two fishermen. One, as you said, there's one with a net, and one here right at the boat, and there's actually a third one over here. And I think it's a connection to the Bible, as Jesus sent out his disciples as fishermen to collect the humans, collect men. And I think the vast spread of the landscape and hills in the past, it's just kind of the distribution of the gospel into the world. I think that was very much the idea of Dali. And this is close to where he lives, so he kind of took inspiration from his immediate surroundings for this part of the painting.
What's on the upper right
sorry.
side?
Yeah, it looks like there's.
It looks like there's something on the upper right hand side,
Right above.
further up.
To the right.
All the way
Off to the right.
Looks like there's a cross.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it almost is a lot of reflections in the clouds, and it might be reflections of the surface or this. And I think the moon is peeking through, so it's very atmospheric, the way he presents the environment over there. Yeah. But let's come back to, I think, this. So I think it's a very, do we agree, it's a very unusual, oh, yes, please. Go back.
No, it's about what you were looking at. It's about the cross.
Okay.
What is that? That shadow across above Jesus is so, there's nothing right about that. It's someone else or some other presence there that is just really, it's not disturbing, it's just questioning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think it's a very unusual way of representing Christ on the cross, and we are looking on top of him, so we are even above him to be able to look, and we could even think it was probably God's view on his beloved Son, whom he sacrificed for us. This is how probably God saw his own Son suffering for us. And yes, I think the light here, it is the light of God, the brightness, creating this beautiful human being. It's perfect.
It's almost as if it's lit from below up.
Yeah, it's kind of I think there's a source of light come from here, right? But there's definitely a source of light because we have this strong shadow of his arms. And then also kind of on the little note. So that's probably a little bit of light from down below. Dali had hired an actor. He was in Hollywood while he was kind of working on this, and he had hired an actor. He was also a stunt man, and so he actually had hung him in the air and then worked with the lights to try to find and visualize exactly the way a person would be hanging if they would be put in a position like this. And I think it's supposedly true. That's the whole weight and his whole. So I think it's a very realistic depiction of the action while it was happening. However, in this painting, Dali did not use nails. So because he's not so much interested in depicting death and the suffering of Christ. In his words, he wanted to celebrate life and actually the triumph over death.
For me, this kind of seems like a timeline. Whereas the bottom picture reminds me of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. It's Jesus' ministry begins, and his followers begin with Jesus finding Jake and John, right? The sons of Zebedee who were fishing. And then his public ministry ends with the cross. So for me, it's kind of this all-in-one picture of the timeline of Jesus' public ministry in a way.
Yes.
I would modify that a little bit. The picture strikes me of being, of conveying emptiness. You know, we think, as Brian was just saying, of the apostles, the fishermen, the crowds, lots of fish, lots of activity. And then if you look at the lower part of the picture, what you have is a desolate landscape, empty, no movement, disillusioned, 2 or 3 fishermen. And then you have this dead man on a cross. And one thing, what they're thinking is, what just happened in the last 2-3 years? I mean, was this real? Is it over? So it was this emptiness. And of course, Christ was not resurrected. So we didn't have a Savior at that point. Because he didn't rise from the dead yet. So it's that in-between state. I mean, the whole history of mankind was hanging in that in-between state.
Oh yeah, for them it was real time. Now we know the good outcome, so it's, I think, easier for us to kind of step through that phase. But yeah, I agree. They were kind of in a limbo, wasn't it?
What was the criticism at the time when it came out?
Excuse me?
What was the criticism of the painting?
Oh, so it was believed, I mean, it kind of got a lot of criticism in terms of it was almost too religious, people said. Other people thought it was kind of kitsch, you know the word kitsch? Yeah. It wasn't representing the event in kind of a holy way. So that was very often the criticism. However, and so it was, Dali painted it, and the director of the Glasgow museum became aware of it, and he pretty much bought it right away. So they bought it in 1952 for £8,200. And then again, that was, I mean, in that, so that's 70 years ago, people were outraged. They thought it was too much money, it wasn't worth it, and they should have spent the money on a Scottish artist and not at a Spanish artist. So you can see it's kind of on and on and on. However, and a very interesting story, they then opened it up for the public to see, and a huge number of people came to see it. And they recorded some of the reactions of the visitors, and they said groups of children kind of chattering, and they would enter the room and fell silent because they were just so taken by the real painting, by the presence of the painting. Or men would walk in and would automatically take off their hat. So once you see it in presence, if you are in the presence of the painting, it, I think, makes a real impact. However, a couple of years ago, the Spanish government wanted to buy the painting back because, well, it's a Spanish painting by a famous Spanish artist, and they offered $80 million to Scotland, to the museum, to buy it back. And they said, there's not enough money you can offer it. We love the painting by now, we're not giving it back. So it's interesting how the feeling flips towards a certain artwork. Just kind of a couple of things. You have maybe 2-3 minutes. So the idea for this painting came to Dali when he saw a drawing that was made by St. John of the Cross in the 16th century. And we can see the similarity, and I actually put it side by side. Kind of the cross, kind of hovering in mid-air, Christ, kind of the whole weight moving him forward, the head down. I think in the painting it's beautiful and unresting that we don't see Christ's face. I think it's very unusual. Supposedly, again, he did the painting. But it's still, even though he took a lot of inspiration from this, it's very different in the execution. This is very unresting, actually, and it shows the suffering of Christ. We can imagine the marks, we can imagine that he went through the flagellation, but in Dali's painting, we don't see that he is suffering. And it's a more kind of a calm depiction of Christ. And Dali just made the comment, this is a painting by Grunewald from the 16th century. It's an altarpiece in a German church. That's not what I want my picture to be. I want, as I said, I want to celebrate life. I want to celebrate, say the one side is better than the other, and that's why we have a wide variety of artists how interpret the readings in different ways, and both sides are represented, which makes it beautiful. And also he liked to arrange his paintings in a particular way, so the head is the visible lines kind of between the arms, and then his feet present a triangle, and the triangle is a symbol of the Trinity. So kind of.
So wide. The cross is never that wide. I mean, the beams. But I mean, it did allow for painting the shadow of the arm, making it that wide. It didn't fall off. You know, the cross.
And that just probably his artistic freedom and how he envisioned it. Yeah. So yeah, just in terms of time, let's see if I had anything. Just want to make sure that I covered all the aspects. Yeah, but it is it's all, the background was black, and then just Christ on the cross. And I think Dali took inspiration from that as well, and kind of having the contrast at the crucifixion in the upper part with a bleak, non-descriptive that background, and then showing us some of the environment, and particularly where he lives.
I just had it was very helpful to hear you say that Dali wanted to celebrate life in this painting, because this is the only picture or the only painting of the crucifixion I've ever seen where it looks like Christ is almost flying. Like there's something almost like the wings of the eagle in terms of his pose, and so I'm glad you mentioned that. Now that I have that paradigm, I can see that triumphant pose even as he's hanging on the cross. So.
I want to thank you for having it projected on the screen. You know, there's so much more light and we can see it so much better.
Oh, okay.
And I especially like, you know, that kind of shadow of the cross over on the right-hand side goes right along. Am I willing to take up my cross?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that really we using the printouts, because sometimes there's details that can be seen almost better on the printout and sometimes on the screen. And I think also when we blow it up, it makes it much more realistic, because it is it's not a huge painting, but it is a larger painting. So. Yes, so I think there would be more to discover on this. Move on to give also our last work of art equal amounts of time. Just before we leave that, the question that I again pondered upon is, am I willing to carry or take my own cross? Just jumping through this, there you go. Now it is time to explore our third and last painting of the evening, the entombment, or Christ being carried to his tomb, attributed to Michelangelo and initiated in 1500 or 1501. Michelangelo was born in 1475, Caprese, Republic of Florence, and died in 1564 in Rome in the Papal States. Michelangelo was an Italian Renaissance sculptor, painter, architect, and poet who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. Michelangelo was considered the greatest living artist in his lifetime, and ever since has been held to be one of the greatest artists of all time. A side effect of Michelangelo's fame in his lifetime was that his career was more fully documented than that of any other artist of the time or earlier. He was the first Western artist whose biography was published while he was alive. In the final chapter in the series of artists' lives in 1550 by the painter and architect Giorgio Vasari, Vasari explicitly presented Michelangelo's work as the culminating perfection of art, surpassing the effects and efforts of all those before him. A number of his works in painting, sculpture, and architecture rank amongst the most famous in existence. Although the fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel are probably the best known of his works, the artist thought of himself primarily as a sculptor. The high regard for the Sistine Chapel is partly a reflection of the greater attention paid to painting rather than to sculpture, and partly, too, because many of the artist's works in other media remain unfinished. Michelangelo worked in marble sculpture all his life, creating, for example, the masterpieces the Pietà in Rome and David in Florence. With this brief introduction to the life and work of Michelangelo, I would like to once more ask you to focus on your attention on the painting, as I read a brief quote from the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verses 38 to 42. I quote, "Joseph of Arimathea, secretly a disciple of Jesus, for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate if he could remove the body of Jesus, and Pilate permitted it. So he came and took his body. Nicodemus, the one who had first come to him at night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloe. They took the body of Jesus and bound it with burial cloth along with the spices, according to the Jewish burial customs. Now in the place where he had been crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been buried. So they laid Jesus there." End of quote. And so this is our last painting for the evening, and I invite any thoughts. And this obviously kind of comes back to my introduction with the unfinished work and how we respond to this. Can we understand it? Can we read it? Does it mean anything to us? And who are the figures? Can we tell?
I found it interesting that Christ is finished, and yet a piece of every other person is not. Right? The sash on the gentleman with the red, the arm of the lady to the lower left, the collar on the gentleman behind, etc., etc., and then total person missing. So everybody, I mean, he didn't finish anybody except Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, so Christ and Saint John the Baptist are the ones that are most complete and most finished. Certainly, Saint John the Baptist is probably pretty much completely finished. Yeah, it is interesting. Joseph of Arimathea, his head is kind of floating in midair there. We see a little bit of his cloak, but that wasn't quite finished. And then there's two figures over here, which have some paint, some layers of oil paint, but they haven't been finished. And we don't know probably exactly who they are. This is believed to be Mary Magdalene. She was probably going to hold a jar of ointment, because that's kind of her attribute in paintings. She's usually recognizable through that. And yes, the area over here, it's almost, so the Virgin Mary is not in the painting, and she is missing. I mean, she's supposed to be there. And this was an interpretation. So this painting is at the National Gallery in London, and one of the curators had a video kind of talking about it. And it was interesting. She kind of expressed it in a way, the Virgin Mary was missing out of grief. I mean, it's almost she removed herself, if we want to see the painting as a full painting. So she was in such a grief, she couldn't almost bear to be right there with her son.
Do you think that would have been her in the corner?
That is assumed that she would have been sitting over there. Yes. So this would have been the space where the Virgin Mary would have been probably kneeling. And I probably somewhere here, because it's kind of a rocky background, and it's kind of like there might have been the idea of two figures carrying, but that hasn't even been, I mean, it's kind of developed because we can tell there's a figure, but not more than that. And also, I think it was curious, the position of Christ. It's not quite sure how he was being carried, because he's kind of straight up, but how would you carry him that way?
It appears that Joseph of Arimathea is the only one that's buried in William's wing. He was the other figures sort of standing back.
Yeah.
You can see everybody's hand except for Joseph. So it does seem like a clumsy way to carry him.
Sorry, say it again.
It does seem like it's a clumsy way to carry him.
Oh yeah, because if you think of it, a corpse, kind of the dead weight, it's almost impossible to hold that. Yes. Yeah. And I always found this painting rather fascinating because of its unfinishedness. It's kind of the mystery of the Passion. It leaves us, again using the word, it leaves us in the limbo, and it's unfinished, and it's Christ's story at this point is unfinished too. This is not the end, right? His death is not the end. His resurrection is still to come. His ascension is still to come. So even though it's not a complete picture, but it does convey, because of it, almost that message. Probably unintentionally. I mean, any painter wouldn't say, oh, okay, that's it. This is the painting I envisioned. But because it just ended up like that, I think we can draw that idea out of it.
I think for me, it almost allows me to enter into the painting a little more, because there's this, the person that I think might have been Mary, but could also be me, could be one of us, and where would we have been had we been present during this time? But I also get this feeling too with these unfinished pieces that each of us are created in the image and likeness of God. We're each an unfinished painting, and God is a master artist that's worked on us, but it's up to us to decide These unfinished ones really make me think about kind of my role in God's kingdom in particular, and what each of our places.
Yeah, and definitely if it's chosen by an artist if they choose unfinishedness, that's exactly what they want. They want to draw the viewer in, the viewer should participate in looking and analyzing and reflecting on the work of art. Yeah.
St. John, he's holding this ribbon, this sash, and it's underneath Christ's thigh. And it's also, it might even be cascading down on Mary Magdalene. But yeah, there's a sash, and you can see that's some of the way it's being held there, but you can't see. It kind of strikes me that this is a female on the other side.
Yes, I think it's a female.
And she's probably holding the other part of the sash. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not quite clear. I agree. I kind of saw that too. So the bandage was around his body, but then it kind of goes here, and it seems it comes out here again.
It's not finished.
Yeah, and then has she wrapped it around her chest, which would help a little bit with the carrying. But yeah, and maybe since we don't know why it was abandoned, maybe it just didn't work. Michelangelo realized that the composition didn't quite work out, and although they can make adjustments to some of the paintings, but also just that much. So maybe it just felt there was too much at all and different that he couldn't just change it with a little bit of work. Yeah, we are coming to an end here. And just as usual, just a quick, this painting had been lost for a long time. And then 30 years later, he sold it to the National Gallery for still not a lot, but £2,000. So you never know what you find when you look through an old stash of artwork. So, and I would like to leave you with a question: am I there for others when they need me? Because I thought there was a lot of people that at the end of the day came back to Christ to carry him and to care for him. Thank you very much for coming, and hopefully see you next week.